Imagine being a loyal, brave American soldier trained to resist any enemy torture, only to suddenly confess to terrible war crimes on global television. In the early 1950s, the US government told a terrified public that an invisible, magical weapon called brainwashing was stealing the minds of these soldiers. But what if the enemy wasn't using mind control at all? What if the real mind control, using dangerous drugs and hypnosis to completely erase memories, was secretly happening right here at home, directed by our own government? To understand the biggest lie of the Cold War, we have to look at a timeline stretching from 1938 to 1977. During this era, a massive shadow government was secretly running very real, very terrifying mind control programs. The most famous of these was Project MKUltra. But these weren't just harmless science experiments, they had real victims. Take the tragic case of a man we'll call David. David was a highly intelligent US Air Force sergeant with top secret security clearance. He wasn't captured by enemy soldiers, he was targeted by his own people. The US military subjected David to intense, dangerous psychochemicals and hypnosis. They completely erased his memory of his military service. They turned this bright young man into what researchers called a human tape recorder. It was literal, scientifically induced mind control, and it was highly illegal. The shadow government knew that if the American public ever found out they were doing this to their own citizens, there would be absolute outrage. They desperately needed a massive distraction. They found their inspiration in a 1949 report by a researcher named Urban L. Janis. Janis simply asked a theoretical question. Were communist countries using hypnotic techniques to force public confessions out of people? For the CIA, this wasn't just a question, it was the perfect blueprint for a cover story. But how do you convince the entire world that a magical, mind-erasing weapon exists? You give it a catchy name. In September 1950, a man named Edward Hunter wrote an article for a Miami newspaper. He claimed the Chinese and Soviets had an unstoppable, mystical way to wash away a person's thoughts and turn them into obedient, communist robots. Hunter formally introduced a brand new, terrifying word to the English language: brainwashing. What the public didn't know was that Edward Hunter wasn't just a journalist, he was an undercover propaganda agent for the CIA. The perfect opportunity to use this new word came during the Korean War. In July 1952, a highly decorated Marine hero, Colonel Frank H. Schwabel, was shot down and captured. Months later, in February 1953, the American public was completely shocked. Colonel Schwabel and other captured pilots appearing on film, formally confessing to dropping germ warfare bombs on innocent civilians. It was a massive disaster for the United States on the global stage. How could patriotic American officers suddenly denounce their own country and admit to war crimes? The answer lies in a smoking gun. A secret CIA memo dated April 11, 1953. In this document, the CIA explicitly tells United Nations Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge exactly how to handle the crisis. They told Lodge to use this fake, brainwashing story as a diplomatic shield. They instructed him to tell the world that these confessions were forced out using magical, Soviet mind control techniques. It worked perfectly. When Colonel Schwabel finally returned home in September 1953, he admitted the painful truth. He wasn't brainwashed by some magical super science. He was just broken down by extreme exhaustion, freezing cold, and being locked in a tiny dirt hole for months. But the truth didn't matter anymore. At a 1954 military court hearing, even though Schwabel was cleared of former charges, his career was completely ruined. The stigma of being brainwashed was permanent. The myth was now real in the minds of the public, but the lies were only going to get bigger. Let's jump to May 1960. Francis Gary Powers, a famous American U-2 spy plane pilot, is shot down over the Soviet Union. At his public trial in Moscow, Powers doesn't act like a tough, defiant action hero. He simply apologizes. The American public goes into an absolute panic. A controversial military doctor named William Jennings Bryan jumps into the spotlight. He fuels the national hysteria by claiming Powers was hypnotized or powerized by the enemy. He tells the public that the Soviets can destroy a pilot's personality in a matter of days without leaving a single mark. But here's the ultimate irony. In 1962, Powers returns home. He tells the CIA point blank that he was never drugged or hypnotized by the Soviets. In fact, the only drugs Powers received during this entire agonizing ordeal were the tranquilizers the CIA gave him during his 3-week debriefing back in America. So why did so many pilots cooperate with the enemy if they weren't brainwashed? Air Force expert Colonel Laird Gutterson later revealed a massive, embarrassing military screw-up. The military had actually given commands secret briefings before they flew. They were explicitly ordered to cooperate with the enemy if captured. Gutterson said they were told to just whip out a bottle of vodka and a red flag and start waving it to avoid being physically tortured. When the public got angry about the POW confessions, the military panicked. Instead of admitting they told their soldiers to cooperate, they lied, hid their own orders, and blamed the terrifying specter of foreign brainwashing. By 1967, this fake word had completely infected American culture. When politician George Romney claimed he was brainwashed by US diplomats about the Vietnam War, the public destroyed his presidential campaign. They truly believed he had fallen victim to mind control. But over in the jungles of Vietnam, the truth was finally starting to leak out. On the night of November 22, 1963, Green Beret medic George E. Smith was captured by the Viet Cong. Based on everything the government had told the public, Smith expected sensory deprivation, bright lights, and clinical hypnosis. Instead, he got a guy in glasses offering him tea and candy. Smith experienced zero magic mind control. He just had simple friendly chats about politics with his captors. They didn't wash his brain, they just methodically argued against the Americans' reasons for the war. Smith realized something profound. The real brainwashing was the arrogant lies his own military told him during his training at Fort Bragg. In February 1968, Colonel Laird Gutterson, the man who knew about the secret orders to cooperate, was shot down. He began a brutal 5-year stint as a prisoner of war. Gutterson survived 27 months of severe solitary confinement, but he didn't turn into a zombie. In fact, to keep everyone's spirits high, he helped start a secret Toastmaster speaking club right there in the prison. He proved once and for all that there were 0 cases of enemy mind control. The human mind was incredibly resilient. In 1971, George E. Smith published a book about his experience. He brought the mundane, non-magical reality of enemy capture straight to the American reading public. The smoke and mirrors were clearing, and soon the shadow government's darkest secret would be dragged into the light. The climax of this decades-long lie arrived in 1978. Investigative journalist Walter Bauer published a bombshell book called Operation Mind Control. Bauer didn't just guess, he used thousands of pages of declassified government documents to completely destroy the mind laundry myth. He revealed the ultimate dark twist. The US government loudly and publicly accused the communists of brainwashing specifically to distract the world from their own illegal mind control weapons. They projected their own crimes onto the enemy. And remember Dr. William Jennings Bryan, the doctor who went on television to warn everybody about Soviet hypnosis? Bauer and other researchers exposed a terrifying alternative theory about him. Dr. Bryan wasn't just an innocent expert warning the public. He was deeply embedded in domestic mind control. Researchers claim he was actively programming domestic assassins and mind control victims for the CIA. He was allegedly doing exactly what he accused the Soviets of doing. When we look back at the timeline, the diagnostic contrast is glaring. The prisoners of war simply changed their stories temporarily under extreme physical pressure and persuasion. But victims like Sergeant David, they truly lost their minds to their own government's psychochemicals. The brainwashing myth was nothing more than a brilliant, evil public relations shield. It protected the military from embarrassment and allowed the shadow government to experiment on its own people in the shadows. Which leaves us with one incredibly disturbing question today. If our government possessed the technology to completely erase a man's memory back in the 1950s, what secret technologies might the shadow government be hiding from us today?